This is what 21st century fascism is starting to look like.
I had a mental breakdown after Donald Trump won.
People are dying as a result of Trump.
I literally broke down in tears and several of my friends cried as well.
Trump is back in the White House, and the usual suspects are not coping well. We're going to break down the wild meltdowns over Trump's looming inauguration and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics, our media, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. First, guys, I'm back from my trip and can't wait to share with you the clips from the panel that I did on LGBT issues involving several queer activists with whom I had a very interesting exchange for the Aspen Institute. I will share clips from that as soon as I have it, but that was why I was gone. Thanks for bearing with me in the hotel setup. And before we get into things today, I do want to share with you guys a really funny hate comment that I received on Instagram. One person wrote, "Please make an episode about Brad versus a shower, because I can smell you through the damn phone. On God, brother, you are smelly." Points for creativity. That one gave me a giggle. It gave me a laugh. And honestly, if you hate watch, feel free to send me hate messages as long as they're funny and creative. Now, up first, as you probably know, Trump is getting inaugurated today. He's back in the White House. And some of our friends on the left are not coping well. First, we're going to check in with far-left Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who took to her Instagram stories to share an interesting message. Basically, AOC is crashing out.
Well, we are on the eve of an authoritarian administration. This is what 21st century fascism is starting to look like. Republicans really model themselves after Orban's Hungary. And so you can look to see how Viktor Orban runs Hungary to get a taste of how they will try to govern and control media and companies in the United States. And this is kind of an entree to that.
Babe, calm down, okay? Touch grass. There are plenty of criticisms to be made of Trump, but this rhetoric about 21st century fascism and we're on the verge of an authoritarian takeover is ridiculous, hyperbolic, and played out. We already know that y'all don't mean half the things you said, hence why people like Obama warned that Trump was like Hitler and then are seen laughing and smiling with him just weeks later. Like, we know that you guys don't really mean this alarmist rhetoric. Actually, I think AOC might kind of mean it because she gives true believer Delulu vibes, not like fake phony vibes like somebody like Obama does when he says this stuff, but it's still out of touch, okay? Trump was president once. The world did not end. The sky did not fall. Some things were really good. Other things were kind of messed up and wrong. We can have that conversation. There will be a mixed bag. I'm probably going to do a deep dive on Trump's early executive agenda. Some of it I really like. Some of it I have some questions about. But it is not 21st century fascism. This is not the new Hitler taking over. And frankly, if it was, and you actually believe that, you probably wouldn't be talking like this publicly, because only in a free country can you criticize the leaders of your government so passionately and so extremely. In an actual authoritarian dictatorship, you can't do that. And what's so strange about AOC's little rant here is that many of the things she's describing, one, not really sure Trump will actually do, but also the Biden administration very much did. I mean, this was extensively revealed in the Twitter files and the Facebook files, but the Biden administration extensively pressured social media platforms to try to control them, to try to shut down American speech they don't like. They tried to form a disinformation governance board, and they tried to bully these companies. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast the other day. Facebook was harassed and threatened by the Biden administration to take down speech, even memes they didn't like. So if Trump does that, I'll be totally against it and speaking out against it. And he has said some things over the years and even recently that I think are incompatible with free speech, like wanting to ban flag burning. But the things she's describing as authoritarian and what the totalitarian government we're about to have already been happening under the Biden administration. And no, I don't think the Biden administration were totalitarian fascists, but I do think they crossed a lot of disturbing lines and engaged in authoritarian behaviors for sure. And in fact, we're going to talk about some more of that they're doing on their way out at the end of today's show. But it's just hilarious to me how she doesn't seem to realize that many of the alarmist warnings she's making about the Trump 2.0 administration apply to the administration she pretty closely aligned herself with. The math is not mathing, and Democrats would fare better if they could tone down the hysteria, because it's not working on most of the public. We're kind of immune and numb to it at this point, but it is driving some of their supporters kind of insane. And that was what was on full display at some of the protests in DC over the last couple days about the inauguration. We're going to take a look at some footage from the on-the-ground reporter Savannah Hernandez, right-leaning online reporter, who went to one of these protests and spoke to some of the people who are out there resisting the inauguration, and the results are kind of hilarious.
What have the mental repercussions of Donald Trump being the 47th president been?
Oh, guys, elections should not affect you that deeply, okay? Deep breath. It's going to be okay.
I'm personally here because I had a mental breakdown after Donald Trump won.
It's devastation. It's absolute, complete devastation to people's mental, emotional, physical, and psychological health. People are dying as a result of Trump being elected. There are people dying by suicide because they don't want to live in a country where their rights are not respected and them as people are not seen as people, but rather than objects of that should be eliminated.
Good gosh, these people are not well. That is tragic, what she's describing about people taking their own lives. And I don't know if that's true. To whatever extent it is happening, it's horrible. But that's about the mental health and the frailty of the emotional and kind of psychological health of the person involved. It's not actually about the election. And this is a description of what Trump or MAGA wants to do with this country that has no basis in reality, just wanting to eliminate everyone and no rights for anyone. I mean, this is the problem with the kind of alarmist, hyperbolic rhetoric that you see from left-wing activists, from Democratic politicians like AOC, is that some of their supporters believe it. It's not just making criticisms or saying, they're going to restrict abortion or other things that people might not like. They might roll back some trans stuff that people support. They're not going to do that. They have to ratchet up the rhetoric to an 11 out of 10, and they don't seem to realize or care that makes their diehard supporters, like the people in this video, come unhinged because they believe the propaganda, they believe the alarmism, and that can have tragic consequences, as we're witnessing here with these people whose brains and frankly, souls appear to have been broken by Trump derangement syndrome. Again, we survived one Trump presidency. We're going to survive another. It's not that deep. Y'all need to all calm down.
It's a downward mental impact. It's not good.
My biggest worry right now, honestly, as a mother of a trans kid, I really worry about their rights. Like my sign says, our own Constitution only says all men are created equal, and I really wish that would change for the whole country.
Fact check. Incorrect. We have an equal protection clause in the Constitution that enshrines equality for all people, not just men. And I'm sorry, but if your big issue is being able to give your kid a sex change, one, I really question the morality, ethics, and safety of that. But two, if you live in a blue state, frankly, unfortunately, in my view at least, that's probably not going away.
I don't think the government has any place telling us what we can and can't do with our bodies, and no uterus, no opinion.
Well, that's incredibly transphobic. Trans women are women, and women can decide on abortion.
Excuse me, it's ma'am. It is ma'am.
I mean, I've always found the no uterus, no opinion thing kind of silly. Like, they didn't apply that logic to the 9 men who authored the original Roe v. Wade decision, did they? Seems like something they only pull out when they disagree with the man's opinion, not when they agree with it.
And I definitely don't feel like women are treated equal in society, and I'm definitely worried about, the right to an abortion and birth control being taken away. But I also recognize that as, a white woman, I have a lot more privileged than a lot of women in this country, and there are other women that are facing a lot more of their rights being taken away, like trans women and women of color. So I come out here to support them as well and just try to keep fighting the good fight for as long as we can until we can get our rights in the Constitution.
Bruh, I love the woke mind virus where they can't even just stick to their, I'm a liberal woman, I believe abortion is a woman's right, blah, blah, blah. We can have that conversation. Yeah, okay, let's talk about that. No, and you have to go to the trans women, women of color, I have privilege. Like, the need to bring that up unsolicited is just very much a tell of how that kind of culture breaks people's brains. Like, you don't need to constantly self-flagellate at the altar of identity politics, baby. It's okay to just have an opinion and not constantly remind everyone how privileged you are. And look, we're going to have to talk about abortion, and some serious abortion changes may be made. But to be clear, Trump doesn't want a national abortion ban, has actually taken a somewhat moderate position on abortion, and I really don't think the Republicans are going to try even, let alone be successful at banning birth control. That's not a thing people need to be worried about. At least, certainly not at the federal level, which is what we're talking about here. And of course, because this is a lived out protest, there had to be at least one woman in the full Handmaid's Tale kit and costume.
I literally broke down in tears, and several of my friends cried as well. It's scary. I mean, a lot of my friends are nurses, and we are scared for our future. I think that the people that are in support of it are probably in support of it for the wrong reason. They want cheaper eggs and gas and milk.
I love that. She's like, the wrong reasons, like wanting to be able to afford to live? And I'm sorry, but the Handmaid's Tale thing is so ridiculous to me. No matter what you think of some of the Trump policies or Republican policies about these issues, it's not the Handmaid's Tale, okay? The first Trump presidency wasn't, and you just look ridiculous.
It just was really difficult to wrap my head around the fact that half of my country didn't even think that women and transgender people and gay people and people of color should have basic rights.
Goodness. Seriously? These people actually think that half the country just doesn't want anyone to have rights, and then half the country supports equality and people having rights. It's just the goodies versus the baddies, the evil, mean people who want to oppress everyone versus the heroic, kind people. Are you a toddler? Do you have a preschool level understanding of the complicated issues that divide us? Because frankly, most MAGA don't have any problem with gay people having rights, with women having rights, with any of the things you listed, really. I mean, some of the trans stuff, they object to what you call trans rights, but that's kind of a deeper conversation. And I'm always just struck by the complete lack of nuance and the complete deconstruction of the other side, as if it's just some caricature and as if it's really as simple. You and your infinite wisdom at 23 years old, or whatever this young woman is, you've just figured the whole world out. And politics is as simple as the good guys versus the bad guys. And it's such a shame that 51% of America chose to be evil, but maybe they'll wake up one day and join you in your benevolent wisdom. Give me a break. This whole thing is so absurd. I mean, I support these people's right to protest till to their heart's content. It is free speech. It is their First Amendment right. But I do think it's pretty silly. And a lot of them seem totally out of touch and all worked up for reasons that are far exaggerated compared to the actual reality we face. And I think in that sense, what they're doing is harmful and encouraging other people to have levels of fear that are just not justified. There'll be some good things, some bad things in the Trump administration. I'll give you my honest opinion about it either way, but it's not going to be the end of the world. It's not going to be the end of rights for brown people or gay people or any of this nonsense. Trump was president once before, and the sky didn't fall. Just like Joe Biden, we made it through 4 years of him and all sorts of messed up policies and infringements on freedoms that I thought were horrible, but America did not end. It was not, in fact, the last election of our lifetime or any of the things that you heard some far-right people say. America will be just fine, and everybody needs to take a chill pill. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button while you're at it, and do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. And now we got to check in with the TikTok refugees because some of them are falling for straight up communist propaganda. So for context, guys, I was going to do a whole segment on the latest with the TikTok ban. It got banned, everyone freaked out, but then it put it back up because Trump says he's not going to enforce the law. It's a whole mess. I'm kind of waiting to see how things settle before I open that can of worms up because I had a whole segment prepared that no longer made sense once they reinstated it, but we'll get there. One piece of this conversation we can talk about for now, though, is the fact that some of the left-wing young people, the Gen Zers, the TikTok influencers, even some older ones who aren't Gen Z, who are so upset about the TikTok ban. I understand their frustration. Many of them are losing a source of income, a small business, a platform they love. But some of them are taking that to an unhinged extreme and seem to be just drinking straight up communist Kool-Aid and now believing some absurd fantasy vision of what life is like in China as if it's somehow better than America. Take a listen to this compilation of a couple of videos I made where delusional TikTok refugees, again, kind of ridiculous that they're calling themselves that, have actually convinced themselves that life under the Chinese Communist Party's regime is some paradise compared to our dystopia here in America. Take a listen and get ready to lose some brain cells.
I'm sure that we have all experienced someone telling us when we talk about how bad it is here in America to go and see what the standard of living is in China. Well, we took your advice. And I can guarantee this was not the outcome they were expecting.
I'm just filled with the most impotent rage. What do you mean? That people in China work one job and they don't even work 40 hours and they can easily afford their life? They keep us in these chains on purpose, and it never had to be like this.
U.S. government, you got some splaining to do, because we're seeing videos and their life is looking so much better than ours. We're watching everyday life in China. We don't even need propaganda. We're watching everyday clips. Shit's cheaper, shit's cleaner, people on the app are nicer. You better hope MAGA doesn't get on there. Because if China has the equivalent of a Ford F-150 and if it costs like under $10,000, you're so fucked.
Y'all, people are actually this dumb. People actually saw a handful of videos on a social media app and decided that life is better in China than in America. First, before we even get into all the pesky facts and statistics that totally deconstruct that narrative, just think about how they're reaching this conclusion. By a sample size of videos they're seeing on Chinese social media. That's a terrible way to get a perception of what life is like in a country. If you looked at just American influencers' videos, you would not get a good sample of what life is like for the average American. Would you? No. And obviously the same thing is true of China or any other country. It's like, this is your scientific way of analyzing what life is like in Beijing? Do they not teach any media literacy or critical thinking in schools anymore? Now, when you look at the actual statistics, China has done a good job in recent decades of reducing its insane levels of poverty that it had before. And it's done this in part through pro-market, somewhat more capitalistic reforms that have lifted tens of millions of Chinese citizens out of absolute poverty. But there are, to be clear, still millions and millions of people in China who live on less than $6 a day. There are millions of people who are essentially serfs and rice farmers in rural poverty. You don't have to take my word for it. The Human Development Index, comparing China to the United States, shows us way ahead of them. All the things that define human well-being, we blow them away. And it is simply not true that people in China work less hours and can afford everything and just have this great standard of living. Fallen for propaganda, babe, again. As the economist Jeremy Horpdahl pointed out on Twitter, the average worker in China works 400 more hours per year than in the United States, and their average income is just 28% of the US's average income. Seriously, the 2023 income per person in China was $12,500. In the United States, it was $82,000. You guys probably can't even really wrap your heads around what a profound difference in living standards that equates to. The poorest Americans live fairly well compared to a whole lot of people in China. All of these are just publicly available facts about economics and living standards. But that doesn't even take us into a much more profound difference between China in America, which is the basic human freedoms that we still enjoy in the US. We have our problems, we have our infringements on our freedoms, but there is nothing even close to what it's like in China. They oppress religious minorities there and put them into literal concentration camps. They arrest and disappear people who speak out against the government or who are involved in things the government wants to cover up. I mean, I had a friend in college who came to the United States from China as an international student, and she told me she still had to be careful what she posted on social media, because if she posted anything, even while she was in the US, critical of the Chinese government, her family at home could be punished by the government, could be arrested, could face consequences, social sanction, limitations on their business, on their lives. We are not a perfect country. We have had incursions onto our freedoms in recent years, but any comparison to China, as if we're remotely the same, let alone worse, is delusional. But a lot of these influencers and Gen Zers truly are letting this TikTok ban break their brains and push them into the hands of literal communist propagandists and somehow believe just in an absolute upside down version of the world. To me, it's really depressing and concerning, but what do you guys think? Are you even surprised at this point? Or is this just par for the course? Let me know in the comments, and do hit that like button while you're at it. And now we got to talk about President Biden, because boy, is this man acting a fool on his way out of office. So we already knew the Democrats think you can choose whatever pronoun in the world you want, but now they apparently think you can also choose your own constitution. Biden decided to announce that he believes or identifies as there now being a 28th Amendment to the Constitution, even though no such amendment exists. The context you need to know here is that there was a push to ratify an amendment called the Equal Rights Amendment that simply stated the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, and that Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Basically, it was meant to legally enshrine in the Constitution equality under the law for the sexes. But the push to enshrine this amendment failed. They didn't get enough states to ratify it by the deadline that was set out in the initial introduction, and some states since rescinded their support for it. But Biden, in his final days of office, decided to just come out and say, actually now this amendment is the law, I declare it so. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. Take a listen to the president. Although by the time you hear this, he won't be the president anymore. But take a listen.
Just over 100 years ago, a pioneering group of women proposed the Equal Rights Amendment to enshrine the principles of gender equality in our Constitution. Throughout my career, I've been clear, no one should be discriminated against based on their sex. And in order for the amendment to be ratified, it requires 3/4 of the states to ratify it. That benchmark was passed when Virginia ratified the ERA a few years ago. Today, I affirm the Equal Rights Amendment to have cleared all the necessary hurdles to be added to the U.S. Constitution now. The Equal Rights Amendment is the law of the land now. It's the 28th Amendment to the Constitution now.
So it's literally not, though. The president cannot just declare that a constitutional amendment is the law now. The president doesn't decide magically what the law says, the law of the land. The Constitution is not a choose-your-own-adventure book. But somehow, Democratic lawmakers fell in line behind this, a lot of them at least. Senators, Vice President Kamala Harris, all putting out statements saying, yes, the 28th Amendment is real now. We all affirm it. It's literally not, though. As the community note appended to Biden's announcement reads, the National Archivist, who is responsible for enrolling new amendments, has stated that the ERA has not been lawfully ratified, citing a legal opinion drafted by the Biden Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel in 2022, confirming this position. So the Department of the federal government that is responsible for certifying changes to the Constitution says very clearly this has not been added to the Constitution because they haven't met the requirements, and even Biden's own legal experts inside his Justice Department acknowledge that. And yet the president, the vice president, and a bunch of major Democratic senators are out here proclaiming falsely that they've just identified or wished or manifested a new constitutional amendment into being. That's not how this works. And even liberal media outlets are brutally fact-checking them over this. The Washington Post fact-checkers evaluated Biden's claim and declared that the ERA had not been ratified. Sometimes crazy things happen at the end of a presidency, the Washington Post Aaron Blake wrote, but rarely do we see something like this, an outgoing president suddenly declaring there is another amendment to the Constitution. Blake explained the two issues with Biden's narrative. One is the deadline issue. Congress initially passed the amendment with a 7-year deadline for states to ratify it. Congress later extended that deadline by 3 years to 1982, but the ERA still came up 3 states shy. The 3 additional states came much later. The second is that in the 1970s, 5 states voted to rescind their previous votes to ratify the amendment. In other words, only 35 states ratified it by the deadline, and only 33 states currently want it ratified, at least if you look at their most recent word on the matter. So it's very clear across the spectrum. Heck, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg acknowledged this. The late Supreme Court Justice and liberal icon, the ERA hasn't been ratified, hasn't met the conditions to be added to the Constitution. As Blake concluded, a 28th Amendment has not suddenly been appended to the Constitution per Biden's decree. There are still only 27, nor does there appear to be much hope that it will soon. So let's be extremely clear about what's happening here. President Biden, who was supposed to be the guy who stood for the rule of law against Trump's lawlessness and who believed in norms and institutions, has totally disregarded Constitution 101, scholars from his own Justice Department, and tried to circumvent the proper constitutional process and declare as president a new amendment to the Constitution despite having no authority or basis to do so. That is unhinged. That is authoritarian, and it is everything the Biden administration was supposed to not be. It is hypocritical and deranged beyond belief, and frankly, I'm not even sure what the point of it is. I want women to be equal under the law like anybody else, but to me, that's already accomplished through the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. And regardless, even if you want the ERA added, you can't do it like this. You can't just identify as there being a new constitutional amendment. And can you imagine what would have happened if Trump had done this? If Trump had tried to declare a new constitutional amendment or declare an existing one null and void based on no real reasoning or rationale that holds up to scrutiny, they would have freaked out. They would have called it authoritarian. They would have called it tyrannical and abrogation of norms and standards and an attack on American institutions, and they would have been right. And while we do have some liberal media outlets fact-checking and pushing back on him, there's not been the same alarm and tenor to it that we would have seen if Trump had done it. But the other piece of this puzzle that they don't seem to get, Democrats constantly do this, and as somebody in the middle, it makes me want to pull my hair out. Any precedent you set opens the door for the other side to exercise that same exact power. This happened when Democrats eroded the filibuster, and then Republicans eroded it even further and used it to confirm the justices that went on to repeal Roe v. Wade. Democrats opened that can of worms under Harry Reid when Obama was president. And now look, if this were allowed to stand, and even if it doesn't, they've set this precedent here. One of the things Trump wants to do is get rid of birthright citizenship, even though most scholars agree that's legally required by the 14th Amendment. Well, Trump might try to declare that actually birthright citizenship, where anybody who's born in America, even somebody brought here illegally, is a citizen by birth, he might try to declare that null and void, no longer guaranteed by the amendment. And you know what? If Biden can choose his own constitution, his own Bill of Rights, like they, thems choose their pronouns on a daily basis, then Trump can too. Now, of course, I don't think any of this should be a thing. I don't think any of it is supposed to work like that. But you can't play this game only for one side. We desperately need everyone to stop this dangerous game of who can sink lower faster. We have a great country with really important institutions and a brilliant system of government. But if the two sides keep eroding it to try to one-up the other side in the short term, in the long run, we're all screwed. That's just my take. You guys will have to let me know what you think in the comments below. Do make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Do hit that like button before you go, and we'll talk again tomorrow.